I'm here with Dan Cogdell. Dan Cogdell is a famed criminal defense attorney from Texas. He was trained by the great Richard Racehorse Haynes. He has participated in some of Racehorse Haynes' biggest trial, including the famous slave ranch trial. He's also a great trial lawyer in his own right, participating in the Enron trial and also the Clive Doyle trial, which was affiliated with Waco. It's good to have you here, Dan.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me. Thanks.
So can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your professional background?
Sure. I'm a criminal defense lawyer here in Houston, have been for 40 years come September, which is frightening to say. I grew up here in the Houston area, went to the University of Texas, got a smoking hot 2.5 undergraduate degree from the university when you had to have a pulse to get in. If you could get a fishing license, you could get into UT in those days. Then I went to the only law school that would have me, South Texas College of Law, where I'm a proud alumni. Clerked at the Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the highest court in Texas on criminal matters, and then was lucky enough to go to work for my hero and mentor and later partner and good friend, Richard Haynes.
Okay, and so what made Haynes so good? Because he's absolutely a legend. I mean, he's in the literal trial lawyer Hall of Fame. What was it about, first of all, what was it about Haynes that attracted you to him as a young lawyer, as a law student? And then what made him so good?
I kind of went about it the wrong way. So I wanted to get an MBA from the University of Texas. And with my aforementioned GPA, I was never going to get into the MBA program. And about that time, Haynes had finished trying the T. Cullen Davis cases. And I started reading those books. And I'd actually met Mr. Haynes at the motorcycle races where he raced, and I worked at a greasy-haired, dirty fingernail kid that worked at the motorcycle shop. And Mr. Haynes was not a good motorcycle racer. And I thought, well, goddamn, if that guy from the motocross track can do this shit, how hard can it really be? I mean, really? Little did I know how hard it is. But I really went to work, I mean, no kidding, with the sole and specific goal of getting a job with Mr. Haynes. And I was lucky enough, Austin, to have that actually work in my favor. In terms of what makes him so good, where do you start? So, I mean, he was absolutely fearless. I mean, Haynes showed no, I mean, let's back up. He lied about his age. He was 17 years old, enlisted in the Marines, and was at Iwo Jima. I mean, no bullshit. Got shot at Iwo at 17 years old, was a decorated veteran in World War II, re-enlisted to go in the Korean War. He was in the Marines in World War II, and he was an airborne ranger in the Korean War. He was a Golden Gloves boxer. He was this, he was that, all the guys wanted to be like him and all the ladies wanted to be with him. He had a personality bigger than life, but two things. He was absolutely fearless and the most tenacious person I've ever met in my life. The favorite example I give in describing Richard's cross-examination technique is he never asked, for example, what time was it? He would say, was it 12 o'clock? Was it 12:01? Was it 12:00? I mean, he would go around the clock, and that was kind of his pathos, ethos, or whatever. But he was an amazing lawyer. There will never be another one like him, in my view, for sure.
So in particular, what were his skills in cross-examination? I know that Jack Zimmerwoman, or Zimmerperson, as he was called by Racehorse Haynes, I know that he said that Haynes' probably best trial advocacy areas, if you will, were cross-examination and closing argument. So first, starting out with cross-examination, what made him so good at cross-examination?
Tenacity. He would absolutely not give up. And it was interesting because there's a great lawyer, a good friend of mine here in Houston these days by the name of Rusty Hardin. Rusty Hardin, right. Huge success.
Yes.
And they were opposite sides of the same coin, because Haynes would do, I literally saw Richard in the slave ranch trial, I'm not making this up, cross-examine a business records custodian for 2 days.
Oh my God.
That's a 5 predicate cross, right?
Yeah.
And he would do it really to see if there was anything that he could impeach the witness with. I might do a cross-examination that would last a day. He would do the same cross-examination that would last a week. And what Haynes was trying to do was find anything from the witness that would impeach the witness or, attack the state's theory. Rusty, on the other hand, is the complete opposite of the coin. He'll likewise do a 4 or 5 day cross-examination when I might do a day cross-examination, but Rusty is looking for things that support the theory of the defense. So Haynes was looking to blow up a building and Rusty was looking to make a building. So, but it was tenacity, and Haynes he was sizing the witness up and trying to decide when to deliver the kill shot. But he was prepared. He was thorough. He was tenacious. He was charming. He was just the master of the courtroom. I disagree a little bit with Haynes being a great person in final argument, not because I denigrate his skills, but he really won his cases in cross-examination as opposed to the final argument, in my opinion.
Right, and I think that might be true for the majority of trials generally. I've heard it said that you generally win, kind of like Perry Mason, you win basically you win during testimony, whether that's cross or if you put on a case direct, you win it there. You don't really win it in closing. Maybe a very, very close case, but it's few and far between on that.
I'm not sure I've ever won a case in final argument. I've damn sure lost a few, but I don't think I've ever won one in final argument.
So can you give an example of some of the things some of the tactics he would employ in cross-examination? Well, first, let me ask you, so he would cross-examine somebody for like 4 to 5 days. I mean, would a judge today let you get away with that, number one? And number two, like, would juries sit through it
No.
without totally losing interest?
No, and Haynes was absolutely the best lawyer of his generation, but that same style, A, the judges wouldn't let you do it, and B, the jury would hate you. I mean, we are an attention, I can't say it, an ADD society because of these things. I mean, these phones, everybody wants an answer yesterday to the question that's asked today, and we simply don't have the patience. So Richard's style today wouldn't work, but who cares? He's not trying cases today. He was trying them back then. We were a more patient society, I think. We were a more liberal society, I think, in terms of constitutional rights. And Haynes's tour de force really came about after the Vietnam War, and we had a lot of distrust of the government. We had a lot of distrust of authority back then. And while our country is more divided, in my view, than it's ever been, I don't think you have necessarily the same distrust of authority from a courtroom perspective that you had back then.
Can you think of any examples that would really highlight his skills in cross-examination? Anything you saw him do that really just amazed you? Everything he did amazed me. I guess the first, because I'd read all the books. My first trial, to answer your question, Austin, was we were representing a lawyer, a personal injury lawyer, who had dated she would be known these days as a fabric-free entertainer, and he began a relationship with this woman, and she had 2 younger girls, and he was engaged. He was accused of engaging in improper contact with this 15 or 16-year-old girl, whatever it was. There were 2 of them. And by the time Haynes got done cross-examining, of course, by the time we got to trial, she was 21 or something. But by the time Haynes got done cross-examining her, she didn't know if the incident happened in the daytime, in the nighttime, with her clothes on, with her clothes off, with the lights on, with the lights off. Her parents were there. Her parents, just eviscerated her in a kind and gentle and non-abusive way. That's the good part of the story. The bad part of the story is Haynes really didn't believe in anything other than trial by fire, and so I was prepared to watch him take on the
the next daughter and do the same thing. And Haynes stood up and said, "Your Honor, my young colleague, Mr. Cogdell, is going to take the next witness." And I was not prepared for that. And how my cross-examination didn't get him convicted is a question for the ages. But when you tried a case with Haynes, it was like, "You're up, go."
Whoa, that's incredible. I can't believe that. I've heard similar stories like from Michael Ramsey in an interview, another, just for the viewers, another well-renowned Texas criminal defense lawyer, real legend, and a very nice man, very kind man. He once said that Haynes had kind of threw him under the bus too. And one time they went to try a case together, and he somehow lost his shoes. He couldn't find his best pair of shoes, and so Haynes said, "It's all right." Yeah,
motorcycle boot story.
Yeah, motorcycle boot story. He said, "Put on your motorcycle boots, you'll be fine." So he, no one will notice, is what he said. And so they walked into court, and the first thing out of Haynes' mouth, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, and Your Honor, I am so sorry. I'd like to apologize on behalf of my young colleague here, who seems to have lost his lawyer shoes." And then it was a total joke on, of Mike Ramsey, and obviously it worked to Haynes' advantage, but he wasn't going to tell Ramsey till he got that impression live. I mean, just what a figure. What do you say about someone like that with that kind of vigor?
Mike, to get back to Mike, he was a dear friend. And Mike was, I guess, 20 years my senior, but he had the best one-liners of any man I've ever known. My favorite was he was being interviewed by a local magazine here years ago, and he lived in Channelview, Texas, which as it's a blue collar, dirty fingernail, one generation out of a trailer park community sort of place. And at the time, the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan also hailed from Channelview. And Mike,
I heard this, yeah.
Mike was asked, well, how is it that the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan and you, a wild-eyed criminal defense lawyer, hail from the same small community? And he said, and I quote,
"In the light of a burning cross."
I read my Constitution by the light of a burning cross. I mean, he was awesome. Mike was a wonderful man.
And he had the benefit of working under both Percy Foreman and Racehorse Haynes. So I wish he was with us. I understand that he's since passed away.
Yeah, Richard passed away 5 years ago, and Mike passed away 3 years ago, right before the pandemic. But Mike was sort of the first limb of the Haynes tree, and then there was Ray Bass, and then there was Jack Zimmerman, and then there was me and a slew of others. But you'd have to be the village idiot not to have. I mean, as I said at Richard's funeral, however tall I am, I'm only that height because I stood on the shoulders of a 5'6" giant. I mean, Haynes was he was a generational lawyer. Yeah,
and Dan, I want you to know that I've heard from a lot of younger lawyers in Texas that they look up to you. So even though you may have stood on the shoulders of Richard Haynes, there are definitely some lawyers who are standing on your shoulders as well. And I hope that the viewers, in this, who see this video, can kind of pick up some tips from you and learn things from you as well. I understand that it was one of Haynes' sayings that you want to leave the practice of law, the playground better than you found it, so to speak. And I know that, that I have no doubt that that's in part why you agreed to do the interview with me, despite the fact that I'm just a law student getting ready to I'm not even ready to hang a shingle. I'm ready to step into somebody else's shop. I haven't even taken the bar, So I just want to say I appreciate that. And I want you to know that there are people out there who do look up to you, for sure.
Well, there are people out there that think the earth is flat, but I appreciate you relaying the compliment.
Percy Foreman, this is a story told by Al Krieger at the NACDL when you probably heard it. This guy was introducing Percy Foreman. He's like, his name is mentioned alongside Edward Bennett Williams, all these big names, and he is the best trial lawyer in the United States. Here he is, Percy Foreman. And then so Percy Foreman, 6 foot whatever, walks up, and struts up and picks up the mic and says, well, in his voice, which is just iconic. If you listen to some of the footage that's still there, he says, I don't know that I agree with everything that that man just said, but that's just one man's opinion.
That sounds like he one
Yeah.
of my stories about Percy is he was being challenged on an ineffectiveness writ.
Oh,
And
geez.
he had a habit of, those were different days, and he had a habit of becoming very close with his female clients.
Yeah.
And the allegation was that he had taken advantage of the situation in part. And so he was being questioned actually by Jan Fox, who was working for Haynes.
For Haynes, yeah.
And she asked him if he often slept with his female clients. And he said, only those that demand it.
Only those that demand it. Oh man, that's a different world than today.
Different era back then.
Yeah. Let's see. What other stories did I want to? Because I know a lot of stories. By the way, I collect stories of famous trial lawyers. I have since I was a kid. I come from Wyoming, and so my personal role model is Jerry Spence, and I corresponded with Spence, over the years a little bit from here and there, and I always looked up to him and really just read everything he's written, kind of like you and Haynes. The difference is, he's so far, he's like 90 something. Like there's no way I'm going to get to study under him unless he holds out for me a few more years and I can go up to his program he runs in Jackson. Anyway, I guess all this to say I collect stories, Dan. And so I wanted to talk to you and confirm a few of these great stories I'd heard that just seem unreal. I heard it once that there were these kind of white collar stocking type lawyers, that big firm people that came into Richard's office. They're there to have a meeting, and his secretary at the time had some brownies with some special stuff in them. And Haynes thought it would be a good idea to serve the brownies to everybody in the meeting. And so he did, and everyone was having a great time. People were laughing. These usually serious guys were really having a ball. And nobody knew why, and they just went about their business. And then she asked, "Where are my brownies at?" He said, "Oh, I just served them to those guys." She said, "Richard, those were pot brownies." And he said, "We're never talking about this again. We're never." Is that a true one, or is that?
I heard that story. That was before my time, but I certainly heard that story, and I know that secretary, and that's certainly within the realm of possibility. Yes.
Oh man, I love it, and I find that the Texas bar, especially Houston, has just the most phenomenal war stories, the funniest, the most illustrative for young lawyers, really the most legendary.
I think that's true, and I think a lot of that has to do with, in Texas we have a bifurcated trial system, meaning in the state court, it is up to the defendant to have the jury assess punishment or the judge assess punishment. And because of that, I think you end up in trial more. Oftentimes you're just trying to beat the wreck because you think a jury might give you a better result than the prosecutor offered and or that the judge would give. So I always say, I've tried more than 300 trials. That's true, Austin. But 150 of those at least are DWI trials, and people roll their eyes and say a DWI trial, but no big deal. Well, I've never lost a case yet where the client said, "You know what, it's no big deal." But repetition is the mother of skill, and the more cases you try, and or at least in Texas, I think the more cases you have to try, the better you get at stuff. You just don't know who you are coming out of law school. I didn't think I found my skis until I was, 10 years into the practice of it, because I tried to be Haynes. That was a miserable failure on my part. I mean, one of the stories I like to tell on me is I was married I've been married 4 times, but I finally found a great wife, although I'm sure I was.
Wait a second. I want to cut you off for a second. Didn't Haynes say, "I went to the first 2, I stopped going after that"? Is that true?
He did, but Haynes had the quintessential half glasses and the smoke the pipe. had the gray in his temples. And I came home one evening and I had a pipe and I was trying to smoke a pipe and I had the half glasses and I turned to my wife, who's lovely. And I said, who do I look like? She said, you look like an asshole.
I was going to say, you look like a jackass.
So I should have taken that perhaps as a clue that things weren't that perfect at the house, but you got to be who you are. And you can't find out who you are unless you try cases over and over and over and over again to see what works for you, because what works for Edward Bennett Williams or Haynes or Percy or DeGuerin or, insert name here is probably not going to work for you. Probably not going to work for me.
Heard a story, and this will be the last Haynes story, and then we'll move on from Haynes if doing so is possible. In his towering figure, I heard that Percy Foreman once, in mid-argument, a baby was crying in the audience. He went over to the baby and took it up from its mother and just kind of held it close to him and just didn't even miss a beat. Kept making the argument, and the baby goes to sleep. And then at the end he gives it back. How clever. But then Haynes did it. Tell me about when Haynes did it.
I didn't hear that Haynes did it. What I did hear is Percy tried to do it a second time.
Oh shit.
I just like, no, get that woman and her baby, whoever they are. You're not doing that again, Percy.
Okay. That's funny. I heard when Haynes tried to copy Percy, this was his own instance, perhaps, of trying to copy a mentor. And actually, he said this in an interview. And I think Jack the Hat was there for it. And I've talked to Mr. Zimmerman as well. He's a fantastic lawyer, great guy. Yeah. But he said he tried to do it. And the baby, he didn't see that it had a peanut butter sandwich. It stuck all over his neck. Just stuck it all over Richard's his neck, all over his shirt, and kept crying. And finally, the mother said, "Just give me the kid back. It wasn't worth the $20 or something like that." That's how he told the story.
That's like something he would say. So let me brag on Jack, because
please.
Jack the Hat.
I was so impressed with him,
and I did give him that nickname. I think Haynes and Jack were the best trial team ever, because
it was your words in an interview where you said that inspired me to interview Jack Zimmerman. Yeah,
because Haynes was the personality and the character and the raconteur, but Jack's attention to detail was just otherworldly. And between those two, I don't know that they ever lost a case. And they tried a bunch of them, and I have just all the respect in the world for Jack B. He's a wonderful guy. Actually, he ended up testifying for me in the Branch Davidian trial, which was very strange. But he's a wonderful man and a great lawyer, and just a fine. He was such a impressive man that my mother, even in her later stages of Alzheimer and dementia, she would frequently ask, "How's Mr. Zimmerman? How's Mr. Zimmerman?" So he's a wonderful person.
Let me I want to tell a story about Jack Zimmerman when I interviewed him. And actually, I've never told the story because it comes way before I even had the opportunity to conduct the interview. A group of people, I'm in kind of activist circles, social justice activist circles, and I get a call from Texas. I don't know the number, but a friend of mine is on the other line and says, "Look, got this kid, this young rapper. He needs legal counsel. You got to find him. You got to find him a lawyer." And I was just starting out in law school at the time, and I said, I'm good at picking lawyers. I can maybe check out some people and send you some names. And so what I did is this was a famous case, by the way. It was Tay-K. He was in Billboard top 10 music. His song was called "The Race." He wrote the song while he was on the race, on the run from the police.
Oh, wow.
And it got a bunch of attention. My generation was really enamored with it. Everybody was singing that song. I was playing that song. Great song. I don't think you would take to it, but it's so I look up, I see, I immediately know, okay, there's two camps in Texas. There's this people who were trained by this dude named Percy Foreman, never heard of him, and another group that's trained by this guy, Richard Haynes, never heard of him. So I split the difference, said, okay, let me put all the people together. And I decided, based on all the review that I conducted, that the person who was most credible to conduct that defense was Jack Zimmerman. And I called him and said, Zimmerman, he's got an entertainment lawyer right now. And I didn't know all the legal rules, all the ethics, all that stuff, because I just barely started law school. And I said, you got to take this case. You got to get this kid out of jail. I basically said, he's got a Robert Shapiro. He doesn't know what the hell he's doing. He's an entertainment lawyer. He doesn't know how to try cases. I think, what I intimated was, you should seek out this case. You should seek it out. You should start making comments in the media that are favorable to seek it out, but don't seek it out. And Zimmerman's response, I'll never forget it, was, we don't seek out cases. Our firm does not seek out cases. We don't do that. And right there, I knew, because I was handing him a really high profile, high figure, and they would have paid case. And he had the integrity not to take me up on the offer. And that's why I wanted to interview him. So he's a real man of integrity. But that I want to talk about you now, because we've been talking about a lot of other people. So Dan, I understand. I heard it once said that you don't want to get in between Dan Cogdell and a news media camera. Is that true? That's
dangerous airspace.
That's dangerous airspace.
Haynes always said, if you ran as fast to the library as you run towards cameras, we'd be a lot better off.
Was your nickname Skateboard? Was that you?
It was, yes.
Okay. I didn't know. There were some clips they were talking about skateboard. I'm like, who the hell is that? Is that Bass, or is that? So how'd you get the name Skateboard?
So the first case that I tried with Mr. Haynes was a prison killing case in Folsom Prison, where our client ostensibly was trying to get initiated into the Aryan Brotherhood, and that's a blood in, blood out. You got to kill somebody to get in. And our client was charged with, he and his cellmate were charged with killing a third inmate. And we were staying at a Holiday Inn in Sacramento, and we were picking a jury for like 6 months. And so Haynes would come home on the weekends. He wouldn't fly me home on the weekends. So I was stuck in Sacramento in jury selection. After 2 or 3 weeks of that, it becomes pretty predictable and what you're going to be doing the next few days. Anyway, I bought a skateboard because I could go to the parking garage next door and, kill my time on the weekend. So Haynes thought that was the most ridiculous thing ever for a grown man to go get a skateboard. So the name stuck. And just like any other nickname, the more you resist it, the more it's going to.
The more it sticks. One of my professors called me, they said that you're a Mustang Morgan is what they've been calling me. So at first I resisted it, but now I think I'm going to have to embrace it at this point. I wear cowboy boots to class and sometimes a buckle. And I think that's just kind of how it stuck. And
you're from Wyoming, that fits.
Yeah, it fits. And what they say, if it fits, you must acquit. So Dan, tell me about some of your biggest cases. Why don't we talk first about the slave ranch trial? So
it's the strangest trial ever. So that was the biggest case with Richard in Texas. In those days, we represented the Ellebrock family, and the Ellebrocks were land rich and dirt poor. They owned several thousand acres in central Texas in the Kerrville area, which God knows what that would be worth today. But they were accused of torturing some folks to death, some transients, and that's the good news. The bad news is they tape recorded the torture sessions. Let me cue this up.
I'll put that as a note to the viewers. You ever torture somebody to death, don't record it.
Yeah, so they had tortured this fella and hung him in a crucifixion position between 2 trees, and there are literally days of this right here.
Oh my God! Oh Lord! Please, Lord. No. Oh, Lord. Please, Lord, I'm about to do it.
You don't want to do that.
I'm doing it. Oh my God.
Those might get pants, man. You want to see.
It's about halfway up. Oh, ah!
That goes on for days. 4 days. Then that fella eventually died. Then they burn his body on a cedar pile of branches, and they play, you can't make this shit up, Johnny Cash's Ring of Fire while they're burning this guy's body. So the Texas Rangers come in, and let me stop with the torture tape. So we hear those tapes, and I'm like, Mr. Haynes, what are we going to do about those tapes? I mean, those are awful. And Haynes said, that's easy. I said, how is that easy? He said, we're going to make the state play those tapes every single day. This trial is going to last 6 weeks. By the end of 6 weeks, they're not going to give a shit about those tapes because they're going to be used to them. It's like watching pornography. The first time you see pornography, it's like, oh my God. And then, later it's, well, the pizza guy is going to come in with a monkey on his back, and here we go. So he said, we got to desensitize them to it. The only way we can do that is play them over and over. A smart prosecutor play them in open and play them on cross and play them on close for about 10 minutes, but we're going to make them play them every day. I'm like, okay. But anyway, so this is 1984. And the medical examiner, Austin, was just a complete whore for the state. And he looked at a piece
I know the type.
charred human bone in 1984 and says, oh, this guy came to his death as a result of a heart attack being caused by cattle prod. Well, you can't tell that in the year of our Lord 2022, much less 1984. And there was, in fact, a dispute as to whether this guy had died as a result of the cattle prodding or not. But being a good frat boy straight out of UT, I was familiar with what a cattle prod felt like, because we used them in Hell Week in those days, stupidly enough. So Haynes was going to shock himself with the cattle prod during cross-examination to demonstrate, but he had a trick shoulder as a result of had a parachute incident where his shoulder, anyway, threw his shoulder out of socket. So it fell upon me to shock myself with the cattle prod in front of the medical examiner. So
did you?
I absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. 100%.
How'd it feel?
I got used to it. It's like the anticipation. It's like a root canal. The fear of it's a lot worse than the reality of it. And with it kind of feels like pinching yourself with a pair of pliers.
Yeah, I know what it feels like.
Yeah. So I had, stayed awake for weeks, shocking myself with the cattle prod. And doctors, this is the same cattle prod. Could you put your batteries in? Shock myself. Am I dead yet, doctor? Am I dead? Am I still alive or am I dead? So the funny thing, Haynes being Haynes, often told that story, but in the first person. And at his funeral, Dr. Young, he's a great preacher here in Texas, said he was so committed to his practice and his clients that he shocked himself with the cattle prod. And my wife was like, you better set him straight. And I'm like, I am not going to call out Haynes' funeral. That is not happening. But back to Ramsey, I was inspired to do that because Ramsey and Haynes had defended some biker types who had allegedly kidnapped a woman, put her in a crucifix position, and supposedly Ramsey had his hand shot with Novocaine or whatever, and was going to nail his hand to the banister. And the judge is like, no, you're not going to do that. So Ramsey sort of inspired me to the well, if Ramsey was willing to do that, the least I can do is shock myself with a cattle prod. So it was a family of lawyers, but there was always sibling rivalry, right? So if Ramsey, I got to do this. But that was the wildest trial I've ever had. They actually just shot a documentary on it. They're looking for funding. I don't know if that story is ever going to be told, but that was an amazing trial. We got our guy probation out of that. The Branch Davidian trial was I'll send you a link. They did a really good documentary on the Oxygen Network of my role in that trial. And now, back during the pandemic, there was like a 9-part series, Austin, called Waco, that was number one on Netflix. Well,
I've seen that one.
The same producers, the Dowdle brothers, are doing it, but this time they're focusing on the trial. And I've actually spent a lot of time with, there's an actor who I knew his face, I just didn't know his name. His name is Giovanni Ribisi. And he was in Saving Private Ryan. He's got a bunch of skins, but he's like 5'7", 150 pounds. He's playing me. And it's just, this guy had done a deep dive. We were talking, he was throwing all my catchphrases and all this. It's really weird to see what you did play out. It's interesting. But to me, and this is one of the things your brother-in-law students need to know is, probably more often than not in criminal defense work, you're representing very difficult people. They may not be guilty, but they, more often than not, they've made one or a series of really bad decisions. They are under a tremendous amount of stress and pressure, and they can be very, very difficult. And after 5 years or 10 years, much less 40 years, you want to bang your head against the wall because what you're trying to do is help people. But a lot of those people are assholes. I mean, they're just very, very difficult personality points. But every lawyer should have a case like the Branch Davidian case, because it allowed me to really fully appreciate how important the role of a criminal defense lawyer is. Because what happened to those people, what the ATF and the FBI and the other law enforcement agencies involved, I mean, they killed those people directly or indirectly. They
burned them alive.
And they knew that fire was going to happen to a certain. They alerted, everybody. They alerted the media. They didn't alert the fire, the fire department.
Women, children.
It was criminal what they did, and I thank God that I say that like I'm a religious person. I'm not, but I thank God that I was able to be a part of that trial, because to this day it gives me oxygen in my lungs when I'm up against overwhelming odds or a self-righteous asshole of a prosecutor or a denigrating judge or whatever. Because without the role of a criminal defense lawyer, we don't have freedom. I mean, we just don't. And what we do is very, very important. And it's every lawyer should find a case like the Branch Davidian case in whatever shape, form, or facet to help somebody who deserves it. Because if you just keep trying to help assholes, that gets old. Yeah,
no, I'm sure. And I was thinking, especially when general practice criminal defense lawyers go up into white collar defense, I heard that the asshole ratio of assholes increases typically.
Oh, it does. It does. And the level of disparity and sort of the more complex the case, the more resources you've got to have. And at one point in the outline, you asked me why did I join a big firm?
Yeah,
because you need the resources sometimes. And this business is a feast or famine business, meaning sometimes you have enough cases and then you don't have enough folks that work for you. And then sometimes you got too many folks that work for you and you don't have enough business. Well, being able to, if I got another Enron case in tomorrow where I've got to throw 10 lawyers at it, I've got the resources to do it. It's got its limitations, like everything else. The grass is always greener, but having the resources to try a white collar case. I mean, document assimilation alone, just the software can make you go broke if you're a solo practitioner paying.
Yeah, I've heard
$5-10 grand a month for that shit. That adds up.
So let me ask you this, Dan, and I'm gonna I'll be vulnerable here, and I'll just say that if I was a member of a firm in your position with your accolades and your level of success, and I walked in and I looked up at the sign there and it didn't say my name somewhere in there, I might be a little ticked. What do you think about that?
That's I've got enough ego to admit I've got ego. I don't like it that my name's not on the letterhead, but Jones and Walker have been dead for 100
I'll start a petition.
Yeah. But this firm's been good to me, and I appreciate what they've done. So in a perfect world, I mean, but, Austin and I had Dan's Law Shop and Muffler Repair Center, as I referred to it, for, 30 years. So it's fine. If the clients don't know who I am before they came here, they probably would have never come here, right? They're looking for me. They're not looking for Mr. Jones or Mr. Walker, who are long dead. So
you tried cases in multiple states, and I think we're kind of getting into this idea about reputation. So when you how do you, as a let's say you're running your own shop, okay, and you're decently well established in your home state, how do you attract cases like from other states outside your home state, and not just cases from neighboring states, but cases maybe if you're in Texas up north, or if you're in
almost always lawyer referrals. The best source of business for any lawyer is referrals from other lawyers. I mean, you can be famous all you want, but if you've got the next CEO of a Fortune 500 company that's going to get indicted or that has been indicted, they've already got corporate counsel. They've Latham and Watkins or whomever has been that entity for 50
Williams and Conley,
whomever, and they're going to call that firm, and that firm is going to do one of two things. They're going to do all they can to keep the case in-house, or they're going to bring in somebody that can go try it. So it's other lawyers that bring me in on out-of-state cases.
Do you ever feel like Texas lawyers are brought in because, as Mark Lanier and Rusty Hardin, Mark Lanier said it and Rusty Hardin repeated it, that South travels well and Yankee doesn't?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And have you interviewed Mark?
I have not had the pleasure of interviewing Mark Lanier. No.
You need to. That guy is the real deal on every single level.
If you could help me out with that, I would be forever grateful. I applied to work with him, but I was rejected. As I heard, you were rejected by Jack on your first attempt to work for Haynes. So I guess we have that in common.
That is true. But Mark, I've had the misfortune of having to speak in front of him at a CLE and after him. It's like opening or closing for the Beatles. It's just a really bad idea. But his ability, first off, he has no vices, which means we don't have anything in common and we don't socialize.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
But his ability to understand the different generations and iterations on, I mean, you win or lose your case on jury selection, period, full stop, end of story. And that can't be said too often. But Mark's ability to connect with different types of folks from different age groups is just, he's a master at it. He's just the absolute best. And he is so good. It doesn't come off as canned or rehearsed or Tony Robbins like. The dude is just amazing. Comes off like a nice guy. He is comes off just like a nice guy. And I sent him a direct email when I applied to work there, and I just didn't know how you apply to firms at this point. So I sent it straight to Mark Lanier when I applied for Lanier firm, and he was nice enough to just say, "Hey, Austin, it's great. This is awesome. Let me refer this to the person who handles this at our office." And just like where he could have said nothing, or he could have said, "Listen, this is you don't talk to me, you talk to one of my underlings," or whatever. But he's an amazing person. But if I had to pick a lawyer of my generation as the greatest trial lawyer I know, it would be Lanier in a second.
Yeah. So let me ask you some more about you, Dan. We talked a lot about some other figures. How did you secure the acquittal for Clive in the Waco case? How'd you do that?
That's a good question. I think, well, Clive and we clashed a lot because Clive was still flying the flag, if you will, of David Koresh, and really wanted to legitimize the teachings and humanize David Koresh. And I didn't give a shit about that. I didn't think any lawyer, much less this lawyer, would ever be able to convince the jury that Koresh was anything other than a manipulative sociopath. The Davidians, by the way, have this belief. I mean, what a good gig it's called the duality of man. So when Koresh would say something prophetical or do something spiritual or recite a passage from the Bible that resonated, that was the prophet in David. Now, if David went to the local strip joint, which he did once a week, or was having sex with a 15-year-old, that was the man. So under that definition, we could all be great. But he and I,
I'll take that one.
Yeah, he and I clashed significantly over that, and I kept telling him the only way you're walking out of here is if the jury views you through your own viewfinder. Let them, and being a Davidian was as natural as being a Catholic or, you know, a Jew to a Catholic or a Jew. He was brought up that way. That was his religion. That was his belief. We didn't have to rationalize or explain Koresh. We had to explain what a pacifist Clive was, and why, while he never pointed a gun, aimed a gun, and I focused on sort of the hypocrisy of the whole raid and how avoidable that was, and how there was absolutely no proof that Clive conspired with anybody. And I think at the end of the day, both of those tactics were successful because the jury was outraged, particularly about the fire. And actually, Austin, we didn't find out until during the trial, because Judge Smith was no bargain. He's since lost his bench for sexual misconduct with staff and such, which is apropos of nothing, but he was extremely pro-prosecution during that trial, rabidly so. Now he kind of wore down at the end, but we didn't find out because he didn't require the government to produce the Jinx Act material until the night before the witness testified. We didn't know that there were actually tape recordings that the government had in their possession, where they secretly tape recorded. They would put in these little spy versus spy listening devices and put them in a Time magazine or Powdered Milk or whatever. And then they had a little RC car they drove up underneath the compound house, and they would radio the signal back out to the listening humans. Point being, the FBI was keenly aware, because it was plain as day on tape, that Koresh and others, Steve Schneider, and others, were planning to set the house on fire if the tanks penetrated the house, because that fire is the only thing a tank driver is afraid of. And so on the day of the trial, the day of April 19th, which would later become Oklahoma City, but on April 19th, when the tanks came in and penetrated the house, they had these FLIR planes, forward-looking infrared radar planes in the air, to show that the Davidians started the fire. They were the ones inside that started the fire. Now, DeGuerin and others want to say the tank started the fire. I don't believe that, but the point being, the law enforcement was keenly aware that fire was going to happen once the tanks penetrated the house. So to cover their ass, they had FLIR planes in the air to show the world, hey, we didn't start the fire, the Davidians started the fire. That's great, but only a handful of folks in that compound were keenly aware that the fire was going to happen. So Clive Doyle and 80 odd other people had no idea. So they put the planes in the air, they get the media on the line, but do they notify? The winds were 40, 50 miles an hour. It went up like a matchstick. So they don't notify the fire department. They don't notify the police department. They don't notify the ambulances or the hospitals or anything. And they literally watch them burn to frigging death. And the fire, which was my biggest fear, that they would convict us of everything if they believed we had anything to do with the fire. The fire was really kind of our best ally, because the government, although they didn't technically start the fire, spiritually, they goddamn sure did. So, you know, people always say, when did you know you were going to win that trial? You know, I had a good idea, because the opening statement by the prosecutor so overpromised stuff they couldn't possibly deliver. They said they were going to put a gun in the hands of each and every one of the defendants over there. The bullshit. And the more they overpromised, the better our chances became. But they took these ridiculous positions. They had snipers. I mean, straight up snipers with sandbags, with the, with the long guns,
Scopes.
and all that.
Yeah.
Scopes. And they didn't call them snipers. They called them forward-looking observers. They didn't call them tanks. They called them, what were they? Earth-moving vehicles. It was
my God.
tank. It just
so cynical.
It was just the height of duplicity and government speak. And the more they piled on, the better our chances became. I think good prosecutors would have stood a much better chance than the folks that were over promising. But that's a really windy way of saying I think Clive and I got lucky because I was able to focus the jury on who he was as opposed to what they were, they being the cult. That's apropos to South travels better than North travels. In the Enron case, I'll never forget it. So we had all these big boy lawyers, right? All these DC, New York, really smart guys come in, and some of these people were being paid by very, very good lawyers with very, very good firms, but they didn't have any seat time in Texas. And there's a guy named Ike Sworkin, and Ike Sworkin would later go on to represent Madoff. Okay. And got Madoff 150 years. I've always wondered how that plea bargain exchange went. Man, you got to take this deal or it's going to get ugly. It's like, why do you plead guilty to anything where you're going to get 100 years?
Yeah.
What's anyway? But Ike, and this is early 2000s, so we were less I don't know. We were a little more. What's the word? Small town back then in terms of the culture of our community. But he gets up in 2002, whatever it was. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Ike Sworkin from New York City. And you see 14 people in the box just cross it. You don't tell people you're from New York and Texas. That's like a bad chili commercial, dude.
Yeah.
Don't do that. And I was 2 or 3 after Ike, and there's a section of Houston called Humble. That's what it's named. And I'm like, good morning. My name is Dan. I'm from Humble. And everybody's kind of, oh, thank God.
Thank God.
New York dudes. But again, with respect to Sheila Kahanik, my client in the Enron case, you just humanized her, because there were people in Merrill Lynch that made millions off these transactions. There were people that skyrocketed their career based upon the transaction that these folks were. My gal, rather, she didn't get a promotion. She didn't get an attaboy. She didn't get a T-shirt. She didn't get nothing. She was just there doing her job. And the government tried to pin the tail on her donkey. But I think at the end of the day, the jury saw her for what she was. She testified, which is always, jaw-droppingly tough to do. She did it well, but the jury has to, more often than not, believe your client is a decent person before they're willing to acquit. If they hate your client, really doesn't matter, or certainly the proof doesn't matter near as much when they dislike your client.
That's a wealth of information there, Dan. In particular, what would you say regarding high-profile cases in general? What is your advice to? So for instance, let me set the scene. There will be a day, I hope, where I will receive client solicitation. Will you be my lawyer? And I'll get into this case, and maybe I already know it's high profile. Maybe it gets high profile. But this is kind of my chance to, number one, show that the American legal system works even when people are despised, because in high profile cases, the defendants are despised. I mean, the media doesn't help you, it hurts you. And number two, to kind of, well, honestly, to solidify my career. The primary objective being the good of the client, the secondary objective being, for my own personal, am I good enough to win this case? There will be a time when I accept that case, Dan. What would you tell the future version of me? What would you sit down and put your hand on my shoulder and say, look, here's what you got to do. Here's the general principles to follow if you want to have a chance at winning this case.
That's a good question. And let me try to answer it this way, because you brought up a number of things. First off, having been involved in a number of high profile cases, I think a lot of lawyers tend to view a specific case as a career case. There's no such thing. There's no such thing. There's a career and there's a case. And people going in there thinking that this one case is their Super Bowl, that's too much pressure. It's the wrong focus. I mean, one of the lawyers that we tried the Branch Davidian case with was Stephen Rocket Rosen. And Rocket was, I loved Rocket. The good news about Rocket was he was all heart. The bad news about Rocket was he's all heart. But he kept saying, this is my career case. This is my career case. This is our, and like, no, it's not, Rocket. This is just another case. There's no such thing as a career case. I don't want to be a one-hit wonder. I want to have a catalog that people will want to buy. I don't want to be a one-hit wonder. So you have to approach it recognizing that. The second thing is never rely on your client for the facts or just your client for the facts. I represented a fellow, but it was a high-profile case. And I was convinced he was telling me the truth. And I was trying to get his narrative out there. And I was trying to get his story out there. And I sat him down with a friendly TV person here in Houston, let him be interviewed, for 5 minutes. And it was just like, way to go. You killed it. Great answers. And I find out, about 2 months into discovery that every single thing he said was false. And that interview was literally marked as government's Exhibit 1. Literally. Point being, this guy was sophisticated. He was well known. He was smart. He was successful. Really well liked guy. And I just thought, well, he's telling me the truth. So don't rely on your client, no matter how smart you think he is, for the truth. The third is, I think less is more sometimes. The more you say publicly, you're just giving the government or the state an opportunity to come in and cut your legs off. Judges also, Austin, are a lot more sensitive to trying to manipulate cases or spin cases in the media. You can get a gag order slapped on you as early as not.
Especially in federal court.
Especially in federal court. And, the government is always going to have, or the state is going to have, the last shot in terms of they'll always be able to get away with more comments about how guilty your client is versus what a judge will let you get away with in terms of how innocent your client is. So less is more. If you have to have a narrative that gets into the facts, keep it short, keep it simple, keep it obvious, and keep saying the same thing. The other thing that took me a little while to recognize, forget about what question you're being asked by the media. Say what you want to say. What, when did you get hired, Mr. Cogdell? My client hired me because he had all the confidence in the world that I could be the lawyer for. Don't forget about the question. Tell him what you want. Tell him the soundbite that you want. Ignore the question. The question is never going to be repeated. Your answer is going to be what's going to be on the loop.
I see. That's very clever. I'll remember that. What do you have to say about taking risks in high profile cases? How important do you think that is?
You have to take risks. I don't think you can win the difficult cases without taking risk. But the greatest victory I'm aware of, you can talk about Michael Jackson's case, which is a great case. You can talk about the Durst case. You can talk about this one. The greatest victory I have ever seen, really just read about in my case, is the Cullen Davis 2, where Cullen was charged with hiring an undercover FBI agent to kill the judge. And what Haynes did in that case was he thought so far outside the box, because to the viewers who aren't familiar with the story, so T. Cullen Davis, who was then, and I think to this day, the richest man ever charged with murder, he was acquitted of attempting to kill his wife. And two people were killed. One was paralyzed and his wife was wounded when, according to the state, Cullen broke into the mansion that he was estranged from with his estranged wife and shot his ex-wife, who survived, her boyfriend, her daughter, and a friend of her daughter. He was acquitted on that. It's a highly sensational case. And after that, he supposedly hired an undercover FBI agent to kill the judge that was presiding over the divorce case. The judge posed in the back of his Cadillac as if he were dead. They poured blood-like surfaces on the judge's clothes. The hitman brought Cullen the judge's driver's license as proof of the kill and said, "We got him dead. We got him dead." And Cullen said, "That's great. That's great." Then they stuffed and cuffed Cullen. Here we go. He was acquitted of that. But what Haynes did that I would have never thought of is he brought in a linguist to explain what Cullen said was not what Cullen really meant, and how Cullen was playing along with the FBI agent because he realized the FBI agent had, in fact, the undercover FBI agent had, in fact, killed this judge. So he was just saying whatever he needed to say to get out of there without getting killed himself. So was that a risk? Absolutely, that was a risk. But he would have never done it without that. So not only did he take a risk, he thought way outside the box.
One last question for you, Mr. Cogdell, Dan. So I think trial lawyers often look to your mentors and look at these people with gigantic personalities. You certainly have one, if you don't mind me saying, as well as other great trial lawyers, Percy Foreman, Racehorse Haynes, and they look at their own personality and kind of how they come off. And they're like, I'm never going to be like quite that animated or quite that awesome or swashbuckling or, attractive to, for entertainment value or whatever. What would you say to lawyers who feel like that? It's my goal, like hopefully to be in the Trial Lawyer Hall of Fame someday, as my ultimate goal. Like, what would you say to me in terms of like, is it sufficient to be myself? Is that really it?
Of course, you be you, just be yourself. And people criticize juries as coming to the wrong conclusions. They don't always get it right. They get swayed. All of that is true. But here's what I know after trying cases for 4 decades. Whatever juries get right or juries get wrong, there's one thing that they do better than any other organism, group, whatever, is they can smell bullshit from a mile away. You get 12 strangers in a room looking at you for 2 days or 2 months or whatever in a row. They're going to know when you're faking it. They're going to know when you aren't you. So don't try to be anybody but you. And, some of the best lawyers I know, there's going to be Richard Midoff here in Houston, who's an amazing lawyer. He was a protege of Joe Jamail. And Joe, you talk about big personality. Joe Jamail was God's own personality. He was just an animal. But Richard worked for Joe for many years. He's the complete opposite of Joe. He's cerebral, he's thoughtful, he's kind, he's not boastful. I mean, completely different, but equally as successful. But because he's Midoff, he's prepared, he's polite, he's methodical, he's gracious. Joe was just this bull on methamphetamine in a courtroom. And Richard's the complete opposite, because that works for Richard, and that's who Richard is. So be yourself. Don't give a shit about anybody else. Don't try to be anybody else. Be yourself.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you. I appreciate it very much.